Iemand die heeft een heart rate monitor om.
Mijn internet vindt het niet leuk als je alle avatars moet laden.
Ja, ik heb mijn distance daarom ook heel laag staan. Joe!
Ja, dat heb ik ook. Doei.
Doei! Zo
much for coming. It's a pleasure to have you all. Thank you if you're tuning in at home or if you're tuning in on stage. It's an absolute pleasure to have you here. My name's Atlas, and today I'm going to be taking you through unleashing your Minecraft nostalgia. Today I'm going to be showing you how you can bring your Minecraft worlds and bring them through to VR chat. Now, we've got a ton to cover today, so I'm going to brisk right through it. Now, just a quick little bit about me before we get into this, and, you know, who's this guy on stage and why you should be listening to him? Well, I did game design for a few years. I did it for my degree, so I have a little bit of familiarity with what I'm doing. I joined the Furality team as a project manager just recently, as well, just for Umbra, so this has been also fantastic. Other than that, thank you very much for coming. Now, what the main things we're going to be covering today are taking your Minecraft Java Edition world and putting it into a 3D model.
I can barely hear.
We're then going to be taking that 3D model and setting it up in Unity. We're then going to be preparing it in Unity, in VR chat.
Helemaal onderaan staat een earmuff mode.
Getting ready for upload, lighting, interactions, colliders, things like that. And then we'll just be covering some other nice little topics about world optimization, maybe a little bit of mentioning of 3D printing if we have some time there as well. So, other than that, let's get to it. So, there's just a couple of things I just want to mention before we begin. Minecraft is a paid game, so I don't want people taking worlds they don't necessarily own and putting them through. This is a form of, you know, technically repurposing what you might own, so do make sure you own a copy of Minecraft before doing this, just to make sure we're not distributing assets that we don't necessarily have the rights to use for. Remember, this is all for personal use, so also keep it in mind there. This is not to be monetized or used in any of your other games or anything like that. Otherwise, let's go ahead. So, the main software we're going to need is a fantastic piece of equipment called Minecraft, you know, the thing we're actually doing today. Other than that, the Unity game engine as well, of course. That's what we use for VR chat. So the current version for that is 2022.3.22. Just recently updated that. And then the key tool, the one that really makes this all happen, is a fantastic tool called Mineways. I'll go into a little bit more information about that later. Other than that, just a basic understanding of Unity and Minecraft goes a really, really long way. So if you have some experience with that already, this panel should be pretty nice for you. And other than that, of course, a PC computer really helps a ton as well. So make sure you have one of those, of course, otherwise I'm sure you wouldn't be looking at me right now. Other than that then, let's go through what Mineways is. So, Mineways is a free open source program that allows users to export their Minecraft worlds into all sorts of different 3D formats, including, you know, object files, VRML files, STL files for 3D printing. And this allows you to take your creations and use them in 3D applications for rendering, 3D printing, and game development. Now, you can export in all sorts of different ways for your needs. You can choose what locations you want to export in your world. You don't have to export the entire thing. That could be huge. You know, Minecraft worlds can be up to 300 million blocks long sometimes. It's a lot of work that we won't be doing today. So do keep that in mind. Other than that, it's really easy to use, there's fantastic documentation, and if you're a first timer, no need to be worried, you don't have to be familiar with this software. Now, you can find Mineways for free online. I'll provide a link for this in the Discord as well for those of you tuning in, but you can find it on realtimerendering.com. It's a fantastic URL, by the way, and you can go to the download page and choose if you want to do it for Windows or Mac. So it'll all be there for you. Mac, we won't be covering that today, we'll be doing everything on PC, since of course it's the majority, but it is there for an option as well. I'm sure it's pretty similar. Now, to export your world in Mineways, there's a few things we're going to have to do first. Now, firstly, let's find where that Mineways Minecraft world is. To begin, we need to find where that world is in our Minecraft directory. Now, this is pretty easy. There's a couple of ways you can do this. If you already have it saved on your desktop somewhere or in a location you're familiar with, go find it. That's where you need it, basically. Other than that, the shortcut is to just go into your computer. You can use the Windows and R key to shortcut to this and find your app data folder. This is where Minecraft saves all of its information. So in there, there'll be a folder called saves, which is actually what your worlds are. Have a look in there, and then they'll be named after the name of your worlds. So that's where you'll be looking. Now, installing Mineways is pretty easy. You just download the zip executable, and inside of there there'll be an exe or a batch file that you can just run, and the program will load right up. So you'll need some sort of compressed zip sort of extractor, so you can use 7-zip or WinRAR. So, you know, WinRAR fans rise up at home. I know everyone will hate me for saying that, but I'm standing on that hill. Now, once you have that, you just extract it in a place. I recommend extracting it to your desktop. Just keep it somewhere safe. Once we're done with the world, you might not need this tool again, but it's always helpful to have on hand in case we need to re-export later for any mistakes we might make. On top of the window that opens up when we run that exe, we'll get this lovely little user interface that we can see things. Now, you won't see anything at first. We haven't told it where your world is, so go to the top corner of the window, click the Open World tab, and then you can find your world in there. Now, I would make sure you make a copy of your world before working on this, just in case you break anything. So when you find that world file, just control, paste it in place, save the old one as a backup or original or something like that. And that way if you break anything, you can always run back. No harm done. We don't want to be breaking your memories now, that's very, very important. Now, do not panic if you cannot see your house when you load up the world. Of course, Minecraft worlds can be massive, and when you load up the world, it's only going to center in at coordinate 000, exactly where you spawned. Now, you know, how many times have you all been in a Minecraft world and you've had to walk for thousands of blocks to find the land that's just right for you? Well, of course, that means you're going to be thousands of blocks away sometimes, and we have to find you. So, there is an easy way to find this, and it's just using the coordinates. There is also an easy-to-use version if you want to locate yourself, so you can actually go onto the tab and click on the view button, and you can teleport to a player location, and that can also help speed it up if you're actually already currently standing where you saved in that world as well. Now, a really easy way to find your coordinates is to go and look at them. You know, load up Minecraft, go and stand where your home is, where you want, or at least where you want to export. And if you press the F3 key, you'll actually get a debug menu, which shows you tons of information. Do not worry, you do not need all of it. There's just this one line here, which is the XYZ line, as I've got highlighted on the slides, and that's the coordinates you'll want. The key ones are the X and Y coordinates, and the Z coordinates, of course, as well, just for height. So just make sure to keep those written down somewhere so you don't lose them. These will be very important. Now, once we've got these coordinates, we need to actually select the area that we want to export. Now, there's a few things to keep in mind before we do this. The larger the range of the world, in terms of how many blocks we're actually exporting, the more work there is to do. So how much you want to export is really dependent on what you're capable of exporting as well, and that goes both ways. What you're capable of exporting is how much you can, essentially, minus some performance concerns to be worried about there, which also very much plays into the world size. Make sure to select depth very carefully. Now, Minecraft worlds are not just 2 dimensions, there's also some depth to it, and they can go pretty damn deep. They've done an update, we've got the Deep Dark now, so there's a good 200-300 blocks worth of depth that we could be worrying about there. So do be cautious, make sure not to export too much if you don't need it, only export what you need to. A really good way to measure this is to go into your world, find the lowest point where you think you might be exporting, use the F3 menu to find your coordinates, and write down
you can send the join request.
Just make sure to add 1 or 2 though, just so you can make sure you're including the floor blocks you're standing on as well. Now, you can click and drag on the map just using your mouse, just to pan around on the UI. This way you can move yourself around to go and eventually find those coordinates you were looking for originally. Now, if you remember your coordinates from written down earlier, you can just sit there and look at the UI at the bottom and actually scroll through to find where your coordinates are actually tracking, so you can drag up in the X positive or negative and vice versa. But another really important tip is actually that the chunks you see are only ones that have been loaded in your world. You will not be able to see anything you haven't explored. So if you end up in a place where there's just tons of checkerboard everywhere, you're not in the right place, you've never loaded that chunk before. So either check that you're not missing a minus or a positive coordinate, or more importantly, check you're in the right world. It'd be a terrible shame if you weren't in the right world all along. So make sure you double check that. Now, we need to select the area we want to export. So for this, we're just going to hold the right click and we're just going to highlight a square, just like you're highlighting folders basically. Just select the area that you want to highlight and you should be able to see a rough block out of what your home looks like from a top-down view. A little bit like if you were using a Minecraft map. Now, try to minimize how much space you're selecting here. It's really, really important that you're not selecting tons of extra space that we're not going to actually be doing anything with. Of course, a little bit is nice to make sure you've actually got some world to explore, but if you're exporting, for example, an entire village, really make sure you clamp that down because that can be quite a lot of work later that you might not need. Now, We need to also select the height and the depth. We've done the X and Y, sorry, the X and Z, but we now need the Y for the height. Now, height isn't too important. There's very few cases where you wouldn't need to really be clamping the height, but it is something to keep in mind. But depth is the more important one. So as mentioned earlier, there can be thousands of blocks below you that we do not need to export. So do make sure that you set that depth as close to where you need to be as possible. Again, you'll save yourself tons of time, and more importantly, you won't have to optimize the world as hard if you've got so much less to optimize. So you can just use the slider at the top of the screen. This is where you adjust the height and the depth as well, and then therefore we'll be ready to go. Now, before we export, just a couple of things we need to do. You need to go to the File Export button at the top corner of the screen, scroll down to Export for Rendering. This is what we'll be doing. I know we're doing this for games, but rendering is going to give us the actual model file that we need. You could use this for Blender, of course, if you wanted to, but for rendering is what we're going to be using when we get this ready for Unity for VR Chat. Now, in there, you want to make sure you export the file as a .obj. That's the file format I like to use for this, and I think it'll be best for our case. And then just make sure you save that somewhere where you're not going to lose it. You'll have to choose a file directory somewhere. If you're already working in a Unity project, great, you can save it straight there. If you haven't made one yet, we're going to cover that in a moment, so just save it on your desktop for now.
I'm going to go grab a snack.
Now, there are a few export settings to configure before we can go through with this. The first ones are, you need to make sure you check the Export All Textures to 3 large images. This actually creates a texture atlas for us. If you do not know what that is, do not worry. It's just a really nice way of laying out multiple different textures into one image, which can help save us tons of memory as well, which is super neat for Minecraft when there's so many block textures to cover. The next one is to split block by type. This will actually split all the blocks into groups so that we can actually address each different block type in Minecraft in Unity later on. More about why that's important later. Material per family is for the same reason. This is so that we can actually texture the blocks differently. We don't want to make everything look like grass or wood or anything like that. Other than that, there's the check double all billboard bases. This means that things like grass and plants will render on both sides because they're actually planes, and planes normally only render on one side. So just make sure they're double-sided, and that way you don't have any one-way grass or anything like that. Other than that, once you're ready, you're just going to click OK, and we're going to export. Just an important note, make sure you don't modify any other settings. Some things can really give you some different results. Okay, so now that we've clicked on that, you should have this lovely prompt showing you what all these statistics are that you've exported. Do take a look at this, because of course polygons are a really important thing for measuring how our world runs. If we've got millions and millions of polygons to run, oh boy, we're going to have a real time trying to get this world running. So do have a look at this and have a measure. The tries is what it might refer to them as. Tries for triangles being polygons. Now, try to keep this under 1 million if you can. Of course, the size of your world matters, and if it is too high, go back and check the size of what you're exporting again. If this is your first time, stick with something really small. It's just a learning process the first time round. If you get something that works really well, great, you can try something bigger next time. That's what I did, and that's the way I learned. So, it's time to prepare for the Unity import. This is the fun part. I bet lots of you love Unity at home if you've had trouble working on your avatars before, but do not worry, I'll be here to run you through it. So, if you haven't already, make sure you've got the correct version of Unity installed. If you already work on your avatars, you should have the right version already. If you have the VR Chat Creator Companion as well, then I'm sure you'll be familiar with what you're doing, but I'm going to cover it very briefly. You just need to go into there and click Create New Project. Select the World 2022 SDK option. That will give us the most up-to-date version of what we have now. And then just make sure you give it a name and a location to save it somewhere possible. Now, make sure you keep it somewhere that's going to be pretty fast. If you've got an old dying hard drive, Unity's not going to be happy if you do that. So if you've got a solid-state drive, nice fast hard drive, that'll be pretty nice for really saving you some time there. Trust me, you'll save yourself hours in the long run. Now, Unity will do its loading. It'll take some time. It's got a lot of things to process, so really important that you go and get a drink and take care of yourself, because once that's all done, it's time to get onto the real hard part. And I say hard part, it's not that scary, but it can be a little bit overwhelming, so try and follow me here. Now, it's time to import the model that we have created. Mindways has done all the work for us now. If you've got that running in the background still, you can close it. We're done for that for now. Good to have it on standby though, in case you're worried about breaking anything. You just want to create yourself a folder in the Unity directory. That way we can have somewhere to save all of our files. Organization is really important. You don't want to be wasting hours of your time finding things. So make sure you keep things split, separated, keep them all in the right place, and that way it'll be nice and easy for you to work on. I just create my folder and call it materials or worlds or objects or anything like that. Whatever works best for your memory, that's the right answer. Now, you want to import your world into the scene. A really easy way to do this is just to quite literally take the little preview in the file browser in Unity of the world and just drag and drop it into the viewport. That's all you really need to do. It should just appear in the screen. Now, when you drag it in this way, it won't always default to the center of the Unity world. The coordinates might be a little bit off. So if you hold for the default Unity layout in the top right corner, you'll have the transform component, which is the position of where the object is. Just make sure to put 0, 0, 0 for everything there, and that way we're all working in the nice center of the world. That'll make things easier later. Once you've done that, you just want to right-click on the inspector side of the screen, the hierarchy side of the screen, and make sure you right-click on that and unpack that prefab. That way when we make changes to it later, Unity won't try and get angry at us. Now, this step is optional, it is not required, but it can be very, very helpful, so I thought I'd put it in there. You want to set your world to be about 0.5 of a coordinate off, just because when we're referring to the coordinates, you can actually place blocks around yourself. If you want to actually go and add some things in later, it's really helpful to be able to go and put things lined up with everything. This way, if you set grid snapping to 1, and you have everything offset by 0.5, every single meter is in the center of where a block would be, meaning that when you just drag your gizmo around to move objects around, they'll snap to as if you were placing blocks in Minecraft, basically. It's super neat, it's super helpful, especially if you're adding in custom objects later. Now, here's my world. Not very textured right now, is it, right? So that's what we're going to do. The blocks are grouped by type. So all the grass blocks are one object, all the torches, all the wood, every wood type, they're all separated per object. So you know when you're working on a world, you can click on objects individually. The same goes for the block type as well. Now, this means that all the materials are linked for those as well, so we can set them all up in one go, and I've got a really nice easy way of making this a lot quicker. So don't worry, you're not going to be dragging on 200 objects today. We've saved you that. Now, another thing is entities are not exported with this tool. Entities are not blocks, so they don't get exported through the data. With this, some things will be missing. This includes things like animals, obviously, but this can also go down to things like conduits or even signs, the sign text. The signs themselves will export, but the text will be missing. But do not worry, I've got something for you about that later. Now, to create the materials, I'd recommend making a new folder. Again, I named my materials, but whatever works best for your memory is what's key here. You just want to right-click in that file browser, make yourself a folder, and make yourself right at home. This is where we're going to be putting all of our material stuff for the world, just to keep it in the right place. Now, we're going to right-click in an empty space in that file browser again, inside that new folder we just created, and we're going to name it opaque block. This is because we're going to make a block that cannot be seen through. I'll be a little bit more detailed about that later on, about why we're doing it this way. In that, you want to drag in the world RGBA texture file that was exported along with all of your model from earlier as well. You should have 3 texture images because we set the 3 image texture atlases from earlier, as mentioned in the export settings. Then you want to set the rendering mode to cutout in the drop-down in the inspector, and then you want to set the smoothness to 0, and if you want, you can also disable specular highlights and reflections because default Minecraft doesn't have that. Now, you could really drag every single material onto every single block, and that would take you a good amount of time, especially if you've got a big world. But a little shortcut is actually to go into the hierarchy, expand and drop down all the child objects inside your world object, highlight everything just inside, don't highlight the world object itself, not the parent. And then in there, if you go to the inspector, you'll actually see the mesh renderer component. You can just drop down the material slot in there, and there'll be a little box where you can drag something in. Drag that material in there, and bang! Every single object in your world has materials all in one go. Handy little tip, might be useful elsewhere as well. So yes, as I mentioned earlier, a quick note, signs will not export text. Sometimes signs can have some really important things on them. Now, I do have a workaround for you. At the end of this panel on the Discord, I'm going to provide you with a little prefab. It's basically just a Minecraft font UI panel that you can drag over and have your individual lines there to write whatever you want. So you'll have to remember what you typed, but if you still got access to the Minecraft world, that'll help you a ton as well. It's not automated, but it's at least a solution. Now, given everything textures, but it looks awful. Everything really does look like that original Roblox look, which is not what we're here for, of course. We're going to do better than that. So, this is a really easy fix. There's just a couple of things we need to tweak. You firstly need to tell Unity not to compress and filter our textures. We're working with pixel art textures here, so if we try to compress them and filter them, we're going to end up with that horrible blurring you just saw, which makes things look terrible. It's not the Minecraft style, so that's not what we want. So an easy fix is just to go into the world RGBA texture images, and then change the filter to point no filter, and enable alpha as transparency whilst you're here as well. That will help us out later on. Now, if you'll have a look, everything should look pretty good. So, we've got color on everything, but we don't have any light. Light is very important. Of course, every world we go to has some form of light usually. How else can we see? So, there's a few things we need to do here to make sure we have lights. There are two things. We've got the actual sunlight from the sun, the light that illuminates everything, unless you're doing a nighttime environment, of course, or the blocks that emit light themselves. So your lanterns, torches, conduits, chests, anything like that, you need to make sure these have light sources so that we can really mimic that effect. So setting up the light material is pretty easy because we've already done most of the work. You just need to go to that material we created earlier, called the opaque block, and we're just going to duplicate it. That's all we're going to do. And then we're just going to make one final change on top of that. Once you have the opaque block and you've duplicated it, just make sure to rename it to light block so you don't get confused with that later on. And then you're going to go down further into that materials inspector, and you're going to enable emission, and you're just going to drag in the same albedo color texture into that emission slot, and then leave everything as it is. Now, as you can see in the screenshots here, everything looks lit. The lights look a little bit more natural. As if you actually go into Minecraft, you'll notice that torches are lit all the way. They don't have any shading because they are the things creating light. But you can also go one step further with this and add it to lanterns, torches, campfires, nether portal blocks. You can go further than default Minecraft if you really want to. Now, just because it has an emissive texture doesn't mean it's making any light. Placing lights takes a really long time, and this is why it's really important that you think about how many lights are in your world and why you think about the world size when exporting. This world here has 120 light sources, and yes, I did have to place every single one of these manually. It does take a long time, so we've got a lot of work ahead of us, but don't worry, we're still going to make it as easy as possible. I would position every single light just above or under the light source itself. This just avoids any sort of shadows that might have been casted from the objects themselves, and we do want them to still be able to cast shadows. You could turn that off as a workaround, but generally, just make sure you keep the light source outside of the object. I would then put these lights sparingly around the place to make sure that you actually light up the entire world. I wouldn't skip out on any lights that are in interior environments, because that's going to give us the best results. But if there are lights outside in sunlight, they don't actually need to be lit, because they'll be at max brightness anyway. Then you can just leave those ones. Other than that, the settings I use is all here on the screen. It's just range at 6.5. I've got a hex code here for the sort of warmish orange color, but of course you can use any color you like. Intensity to about 1.4, that's just my personal preference. And then hard shadows, because soft shadows don't look very good in Minecraft personally, in my opinion. Now, I would make sure you set these settings on your first place light. That way when we duplicate this light later on, you don't have to set this every single time. It'll save you tons of time. Now, quick notes. Minecraft, of course, has its own very unique shading style, and by unique, it's very basic. Unity is not designed to shade the way that Minecraft is. It's just a whole different ballgame. It's a much older game. Things have changed since then. Now, we could try our best to try and copy Minecraft, but promise you, it's going to be harder to make it look like Minecraft than it is just to look amazing. So we might as well just go for the slightly more modern approach, I would say. If some of you use shaders on Minecraft, I know myself, I can't even play without them anymore. Or if any of you have played the RTX Minecraft beta from NVIDIA, this is kind of more towards the sort of direction we'll be moving towards in terms of visual look. But of course, this is your world, and you can light it however you like. Now, we're getting close. Water. The water is going to look quite solid right now. Of course, if you go into Minecraft, you will be able to see through it. So we need to fix that very quickly as well. And this will also apply to things like glass later on as well. Now, to do this, we're just going to go back to our opaque block material, and we're just going to duplicate that as well. Make sure to name that transparent blocks. Now, once you've got that new material, click on that one, go to the inspector, and just make sure you set the rendering mode to that one to fade. This way we'll get that transparency that we need. And then go into the color albedo slot, the big colored bar. Click on that, and you'll get this little color wheel that appears. Just go to the bottom, and you'll have 4 side-scrolling bars that you can have, which is the RGB values, and then the alpha. Just drag the alpha slot down a little bit, and that way you can control the transparency. I use 200, but you can use whatever you like. Now, this is the big one, baking lighting. Now, there's just a final few tweaks we need to make before we can actually bake the light. We need to position the directional light in a way that gives us shadows that we like. So when you make a scene by default, the directional light will be there. You don't normally have to create this, but if it is missing, just check you didn't delete it. You just want to click on that and use the rotation gizmo just to try and get the shadows at an angle you like. So do something that looks dramatic. You can even go for a sunset if you like. I would leave all the settings at default. You could set the shadows to hard. That's what I did, just again to get that better effect. But soft is perfectly fine. And then when you do that, go to the top of the inspector and make sure to click on static. This way it will actually be baked into the lighting. If your lights are not marked as static, they aren't going to get baked, and we don't want 120 real-time lights running in your world. VR chat will not be very happy with us. So make sure you go to all of your lights and set them as static as well. A little tip, if you are obviously watching this before you go and do this, put all of your light objects in one parent game object, and you can have them all in one go there. That way you can just click the parent object, click marker static, and it will literally ask you if it wants to make all the child objects static as well, doing it all for you in one go. Now, light baking is basically an art form in itself. There is no chance we're going to get through that today. I don't even think one panel would be long enough. There's just so much to cover. Now, there are fantastic videos online. That's where I got most of my experience with lighting from, outside of my Unity experience at university. So do use YouTube. It is perfectly okay to use those sources. There's tons of great resources out there. Of course, if you know a friend that does this stuff, go to them as well. I'm sure they'll have some great information. Now, baking light isn't as easy as just clicking the bake lighting and letting it rip. There are a few settings we are going to need to tweak just to at least try and give you something easy to work from. This should be a fairly bomb-proof, good enough solution for a lot of you, but of course if your world is just that massive, you will have to tweak things, but I would hope that if you're working on a world that big, you'd know what you're doing by that point. So, these are the settings that I have here. The key ones are to play with is the light map resolution. You want to try and keep that as low as possible before things look truly terrible. Start small, work up and up and up and up until you get that really good quality that you like. Because light maps can be quite big on texture memory, and that ultimately means that the world is laggier, and you need to download more files to do it. So do try and keep this as small as you can. Okay, so once you've got your settings dialed in, you just want to hit this generate lighting button. A little tip, make sure you go to the light mapper and tell it to use your GPU if you have one to bake. It's going to be so much faster than your CPU. The CPU could take days to bake, the GPU will only take a couple of minutes at tops. Obviously depending on your hardware, but that GPU is going to be faster if you have one. If you play VR chat, I would hope you have one. And there we are. We have light. And here we can see the differences now of where the light comes in. So just to highlight a few differences, we've got the sunlight coming in through the window. We've got the actual campfire where I put an orange point light in there to have some more warmth coming from it. We can see the shadows coming from the lanterns. And we can just see the sort of darkness that comes around the edges of the room as well, just to really add that sort of mood to the entire thing. It really does transform the world entirely, and lighting is very, very powerful. So the more you can learn about it, the more amazing stuff you can do. And of course, that doesn't just apply to Minecraft worlds, it applies to so much more. Now, there are some ways to improve lighting. Ambient occlusion is one of them. This is a thing that adds natural darkness to the edges of corners, basically. So if you go into the Unity Light Mapper, there is an ambient occlusion option there, and you can try playing with those settings between bakes to also see how that turns out. Now, there is a post-processing version of this, but this is not very good for VR chat. I don't even think it's supported that well currently. Could be wrong on that, but from my experience of using ambient occlusion with post-processing, you end up with some weird, horrible camera artifacts. So just avoid that one. Make sure you bake it. It's more performant that way anyway. You just have to take a bit more time baking the lighting. Light probes are really important. They will be in tons of worlds that you've been in before. Now, of course, we can only bake objects that don't move. So the important thing for calculating objects that do move is to give them some sort of light information to try and base themselves off of. So if you have a player walking through into your house, there's going to be a lot more orange light compared to the more white light outside. We need to adjust that, otherwise people are going to look a bit out of place. So try learning about what light probes are. Again, not something we can cover here, and there are some free tools that actually help you get those done a lot quicker, and there are some paid ones that are even better, so I won't be covering that, but have a look at those. That will help you with that as well. And then some other ones are reflection probes. Those just tell areas of the world how to actually reflect objects based on a reference. Fog. Minecraft has fog. Why not add it into Unity? The default light mapper fog basically costs nothing, so you might as well use it. It's all there, and you can really get some nice moody effects with that as well. And then you could also play with different shaders, try different materials, see what does what. There's tons of free resources and assets out there, so try everything. Get everything you can get your hands on. Now, we've got all the lighting. Everything looks pretty neat. We just need to add some colliders so that when I spawn in, I don't clip through the floor. We need to be able to walk around, of course. Now, there is a pretty quick way we can get through this, and it's just using mesh colliders. Now, this is not best practice. Mesh colliders are not the best way of adding colliders to everything, but it is sure quicker, and that's the way we're going to do it. So, the fastest way to add colliders to everything is to go into your inspector, select every physical object inside of that world object again, go to the inspector, click add component, and just add a mesh collider. I know there will be tons of Unity people online saying, that's terrible, don't do that, but I'm just trying to do this quickly for people that want to have fun, so this is a really easy way to do it. Other than that, the doors. Now, the doors are not actually able to be separated one at a time. They are all, again, like all the other blocks, linked together, including double doors. So the way to work around this is to delete all of them. Get rid of all the doors. Go clicking away. Get destroying. Have a bit of fun. Take the stress out a little bit from how far you've made it. Delete all the doors, and then even better, I've created you a prefab. So this is a UDON compatible door that is network synced. That way when you drag this door into your world, you can use VR chat to open and close it. Other people will see it too. It'll all be synced, all ready to go. Just drag and drop at your convenience. And I'll drop that in the Discord as well so that you guys have access to that. And again, if you have snapping enabled from earlier, it'll be even easier to place this because it will snap exactly where it should be. Alright, this is it. All of your efforts have led us to this moment. It is time to upload to VR chat when it lets you. Now, with this, you just got to log into your VR chat account. Just a quick note, you must have a VR chat account to do this. You can't just use Steam, and you must be at least a new user, which is pretty easy. Spend 10 hours in the game, you'll get it in no time. You just want to set yourself the name of the world and a profile icon for the world as well. That way you can actually see what it looks like, and it gives people an idea of what they might be joining. So do have a look at that. It's really important to set that to something that's representative so that people know what they might be getting into. Here then, you just want to set the rest of the details, agree to the privacy policy, of course, if you agree to it, and then click upload. There'll be the build and upload option at the bottom. Now, you may have gone into the world and noticed that things are quite laggy. Things aren't running quite as well as they should be. Now, of course, there's some optimization we might need to do here just to make sure this runs as best as possible. There are some really helpful tools like occlusion culling. This is a thing that can hide objects that aren't in view. But this doesn't tend to be as effective for these Minecraft worlds just because of the way objects are linked together. So some other options is to use a fantastic tool called VR World Toolkit. It has tons of debugging information specifically for VR worlds. Fantastic for VR chat. I use it all the time. It can even get post-processing set up for you at the click of a button, which saves you tons of time. Especially when I keep forgetting how to do it properly every single time. I thought I'd learned by now. Other than that, you can also combine some meshes together to try and save you some performance there. Again, this can be pretty destructive, so only do this if you know what you're doing. But it is an idea. I thought I'd give it a shout. And then other than that, make sure all of your lights are baked. Make sure all of them are marked as static, and when you go to the inspector, make sure you drop down that mode to baked, not mixed or real-time. Real-time lights are very expensive to do, so we want to avoid that if we can. So go and have a double check at everything. We don't want to be casting some really horrible shadows. Now, you can make some more objects interactable. Of course, you could add music to the world. You could add the toggleable doors from earlier. You could add buttons that actually press things. There's so much more you can do. You could even animate particles for your furnaces. There's so many things I wanted to create for this panel that I simply didn't have time to, but it just gives you something to work on. So particle systems are also a ton of fun, so I recommend giving those a look. And I just had some other fun ideas I thought I'd shout out. These were just some things that I did want to do before this panel. You could do a working nether or end portal. You can export those dimensions on Mindways. They will let you. There's just a view drop down in that tool. You could do an animated fire or campfire, also really helpful. You could do a day-night cycle, or animate the water textures. Use buttons instead of UI panels. Make it purely look like Minecraft. Or you could go crazy with the lighting and do some really crazy stuff. You can maybe have some pickups like a sword or a pickaxe. And you can even make maybe openable chests, objects you could actually play with. Now, using texture packs is possible, so I'll quickly cover it. There are some default included ones on Mindways that will actually do it for you out of the box, but there's also some guides on how to use your own as well. Yes, you texture pack lovers at home, they have thought about you, they're all there. There's some great documentation I'll let you have a look through online. You can even go to higher resolution texture packs, like those full HD texture packs that just look crazy, so they're also available for you. And then as mentioned earlier, post-processing is there. You can help just tune the lighting of the world and the actual visual effect a little bit more, so have a look into that. Great tutorials about that online as well. And then just play with Unity's Light Mapper to really try and get the best fidelity that you can. And other than that, environmental effects, like I said earlier, fog and weather, can really just help bring a bit more of Minecraft into Unity. That really helps sell the whole effect. Now, yes, you can bring Quest into this. Of course, Quest can be a little bit of work, but actually Minecraft worlds are pretty lenient as long as you keep them to the right sizes. The texture memory is pretty low, the world download size is pretty low, so it's just the polygon count you've really got to worry about a lot of the time. But again, as long as your world's small enough, it's pretty easy to copy most of this over. Make sure to keep your objects marked as static though, make sure everything's optimized, and again, tons of tutorials online about optimizing for Quest as well. That's a whole different ballgame, so I'm not going to be able to cover that today. Just a couple of shout outs to some other really helpful tools. Bakery is a much faster Unity light mapper, and it's generally just going to produce better results for you. It is a paid tool, so do keep an eye on it, but it is fantastic. So if you're getting into world building, have a look at Bakery. That's really the place to be. Other than that, there's also the Magic Light Probes tool. This is one of the paid tools that does light probes for you automatically. Again, have a research online about light probes. They're fantastic. But other than that, there's millions of videos online, and there's great documentation. So that's also there to help you out if you get stuck. And other than that, wow, I'm out of breath. There's so much to be covered. I couldn't cover it all today, but thank you so much for coming. Thank you to everyone in the audience that came to watch today. I'm now going to answer all the questions the best I can, so if I could invite Demi on stage to help me out here. And we're going to try and answer